The fourth estate of the realm, the watchdog, call it the press, the media, is one fantastic thing that helps, shape opinions and also watch what the government and even what the people do. But the thing here is that practitioners over the years have become endangered species. And that's why our focus today on the World Press Freedom Day is the press. Welcome. I'm Sulaiman Alede. I'm a journalist. Well, in sharing news and a major win for press freedom in Nigeria and Africa, Deutsche Welle has given Nigerian journalist Tobore Ovurie the Freedom of Speech Award for her undercover work in cracking a sex trafficking ring in Benin Republic, and of course in Benin as well, in southern Nigeria. Ovurie's work inspired the movie Oloture, which has gained wide attention. Now, press freedom in Africa has become a major issue on the continent, with journalists threatened and even harmed in the course of delivering on their duties. Now, different governments in Africa have gagged their press as they go on rampage, unchecked, undeterred, and viciously so. The role of the media is to serve as a link between governments and the people. But in situations where those at the helm want their activities in secrecy, it is the role of journalists to find the thinnest and tiniest details. According to Reporters Without Borders, the Press Freedom Index rates many African countries as not free or partly free for journalists. Eritrea and Djibouti are in the top 10 countries in the world with the poorest press freedom, with countries like Ethiopia and Tanzania also sitting low on the list. Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, Tunisia, Swaziland and many other countries also have cases of gagging their press. Well, that's a low for the continent. Nations like Namibia, where the World Press Freedom Day started in 1991, are well rated on the list, sitting as the 17th country in the world with the best freedom for its press. Now, Ghana, South Africa, Botswana are also other African countries who are making positive moves in allowing better freedom for their press. However, they aren't without their stories of repression. I'm joined now by Africa's finest journalist today on The Square, Frederick Nwabufo. He's a journalist and columnist from Nigeria, and Lala Ngwenya, journalist from Zimbabwe. And pretty much later, I'll be joined by Anthony Stevens, journalist from Liberia, and Abdul Malik Bangura, journalist from Sierra Leone, as a tour for all parts of Africa on The Square. Now, let me start with you, Lala, with specificity to your countries and Africa. How will you rate press freedom, starting from your country?
Wow, Solomon, that's a very interesting question to start off with. And by the way, happy World Press Freedom Day to you too, in
Thank
Nigeria and rest of Africa.
Thank you.
Well, when it comes to my country, we are still struggling and we're still fighting for diversity and plurality in the media. We are still fighting some media laws that actually make it difficult for journalists to operate. Only, I think it was last year but one, that's when we had some of the most infringing laws repealed. But these laws had operated since Rhodesian time. That was prior to independence, during colonial time. Those laws were put in by the colonial government of the time. And when the new government, when we gained independence, the new government, which was the ruling ZANU-PF, they also adopted those same principles and those same laws and policies and were using them. They changed the names, but they were still the same laws. They infringed on freedom rights. They infringed on freedom of expression. They infringed on media democracy and media freedom per se. So it was quite unfortunate that you walk into a new, supposedly new democracy, but you still lingering on to old to old reforms or old policies that were meant to stifle Black freedom of expression, and you were then using them against your own people. So these laws were only repealed, like I said, about a year or two ago with the incoming of the Second Republic led by Emmerson Mnangagwa.
Let me bring in Frederick here. I read you a lot, Frederick, and sometimes I said to myself, time was when you just couldn't write the way you've always, you've been writing. So tell us what's changed in Nigeria. Is it Uhuru yet when it comes to freedom for journalists?
Thank you very much, Suleiman. We live in a very militant society. We have the baggage of the military era. So I would not say it's Uhuru yet for Nigerian journalists. If you look at the latest ranking, press freedom ranking, by Reporters Without Borders, we discovered that actually Nigeria went 5 pages behind. In 2020, we were 115. This year, we're 120. So I believe things are not getting better, so to speak, because it is the same ecosystem that journalists operate in, an ecosystem of torture, of fear, intimidation. Of course, we saw how some journalists were intimidated during the NSAS protest. And right now, there is a journalist on the run. He fled the country with family. Jafar, a journalist who actually did a report exposing a certain governor for bribery. So we work in a very, very turbulent ecosystem as journalists in Nigeria. It's not Uhuru yet for journalists.
All right, okay. Lala, there must be some challenges, to the freedom of journalists in Zimbabwe and other parts of the continent. Perhaps maybe we should start looking at some of those challenges. There are quite a number of things that threaten the freedom of journalists on the continent. Which would you identify as the most worrisome?
Okay, I think the most worrisome is security. Just general security, because maybe speaking from my country, there is always this thing that journalists that work for the state-owned media houses are more protected than journalists from private media. From private-owned media houses, they are less protected. So there's the issue of security, that even sometimes, as journalists, you go to certain events and you are asked for your press card, because our press cards, they show which media house you work for. So just that eliminates you, and it can put you at a vulnerable position to say, oh, so you are those people, you are those type of journalists. You are not these journalists. And when they mean these, they mean the ones that work for state-owned media, which is the only TV station in Zimbabwe. Believe it or not, after 40 years of independence, we still have one TV station which is government-owned. It's state-owned. It's literally being run by the ruling party. Then we have quite a number of radio stations that are also owned by the state and the newspapers, but we do have other media houses that are privately owned, or rather commercially owned. But there's still that gap between those that work for state media and the private media. So for me, the number one issue would be security. Security to work freely, security to be able to go anywhere, to talk to anyone, no matter which media house you work for. You are a journalist, and we must not criminalize journalism according to which media house you work for and which one you don't work for. And this is in relation, obviously, to the country that I'm from.
Well, Frederick, help us here. Give us a sense of what the Nigerian perspective is, looking at where Lala left off, trying to give, a difference between government-owned press as well as the privately owned press.
Okay. Well, in Nigeria, we have a situation where journalists working for the government or government-owned media organizations, they don't have the liberty to report without affectations, if I may say. They don't have the liberty to write, to report actual cases, because you have a boss up there who controls everything, who pulls the string. So while journalists in the private media organization actually enjoys some level of independence in reporting, but we don't have that case in those in the government media organizations. Well, let us say something about how to bridge this gap. But I want to say, in the case of Nigeria, to break this cycle of violence against journalists, particularly in Nigeria, we need the judiciary to sit up. We cannot actually end or stop the violence against journalists without the intervention of the judiciary. Journalists are assaulted, journalists are killed, nothing happens afterwards. So the violence continues. We have a case where a journalist that was covering the Islamic movement protest in Abuja was killed. To date, no one has been held to account for that incident. So, and it continues, the cycle continues. Journalists are more or less sacrificial lambs. They hold the government to account and they pay the price in their lives. It shouldn't be that way. We should end the cycle of violence against government and impunity against journalists. So,
and quickly, Lala, do you think journalists are using, instruments at their disposal to more or less, hype what exactly is happening to journalists? Because it would seem as if other professionals are also targets sometimes, but looking at the figures, do you think it's an okay thing to write and say journalists on the continent are not free?
Absolutely. That's the only way we can fight this attack against our profession, because this is our profession. We chose it, we love it, and we want to protect it just like anyone else would want to protect their own profession, doctors, lawyers, nurses. So we have to write. And the fortunate part with us journalists is that we know how to speak. We have words. I mean, our words are so many. We can write, we can capture images, we can capture audios, and we can tell our story. We can tell what affects us as journalists and what is threatening the survival of our profession. So yeah, absolutely, Suleiman. We need to write about them. We need to broadcast the brutality towards journalism, because journalism is not a crime. It's definitely not a crime. Therefore, why should it be safe? Why should journalism be safe? Only when politicians want to use journalists. But when journalists want to expose corruption, when they want to expose what's happening behind those closed doors, then suddenly it becomes a crime. It should be fair. Whether a politician wants to use a journalist or a journalist wants to expose corruption, it has to be on fair ground. Journalists shouldn't be picked and chosen according to what politicians or those in authority or those big people, business people or whoever want to hear from them. Truth must be told, and journalism must never be criminalized.
Well, truth must be told, and journalism must never be criminalized. Let me bring you here, Frederick, quickly. Now we're speaking from across the continent. Lala in Zimbabwe, you in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And of course, here I am in Lagos. The coming of the internet, honestly, seemed to have changed the media and journalism in no small ways. Do you think with the internet, Frederick, the threat posed to journalists can be reduced to some, well, acceptable minimum, if to use that word?
Yes, I think so. I think the media needs to self-regulate. We have a situation where there is the mushrooming of internet infestations, blogs, and all of that. So I believe we need to sanitize the system. But bringing sanity to the system should not be the duty of the government. We should not delegate their responsibility to the government. We should do this duty ourselves. So I believe media practitioners need to come together and seek to decide how to sanitize the system, particularly the online media industry, which is the biggest thing right now. So I believe that's where we need to address. The internet, of course, has both sides, pros and cons. At the same time, we must find a way to deal with the preponderance of fake news, preponderance of hate speeches. Also, this is the duty of trained journalists, practitioners, who should come together to see ways of sanitizing the system. We can't continue this way, because if we continue, certainly we will be teetering on the precipice. So we definitely need to sit up and see ways we can sanitize the system. It is our duty, our bounden duty as journalists to do so. We shouldn't allow blogs and other I wouldn't want social media platforms to mess up the system. So I believe we need to sanitize it, and of course, it is our duty as journalists to do.
Frederick, still staying with you before I come back to Lala. You use the word sanitize. If you look at the theme for this year's World Press Freedom Day, it centers around that. For public good, information for public good. Now, quickly tell us here, if we talk about the social media as well as the internet, which brings to mind people who are not professionals making an incursion or sitting pretty well in that space, how can experts like yourself, Lala, and even myself, and those also watching, let people know what is and what is not in terms of fake news?
Thank you very much. I believe there's a whole lot of education that needs to go into the process. First of all, news, whatever news item, must be in the interest of the public. Whatever reports you want to run, if it's not in the interest of the public, in the interest of the people of the state, then it defeats any reasonable purpose. You have a situation where people publish, young minors, nude photos, and all that. It's a whole mess. It's a mess on the internet. You have a situation where people publish carcasses, dead bodies, and all of that. Just a few days ago, the military released a statement that it will take legal action against anyone who posts dead soldiers, their bodies on social media. And of course, on some of these blogs, it's not right. That's not how it should be. That's not journalism. Journalism must serve the interest of the public. You can't go on and spread fake news, hate speech that could actually bring down the country and say you are reporting. That's not how it should be, and say you are publishing stories. No. Journalism must serve the interest of the public. Please note my words. Not the interest of the government, but interest of the public, the interest of the people. So when you publish fake news that is capable of actually causing a conflagration in the country, whose interest are you serving?
You know, it's a big question there, but I think it's a question that needs an answer. Lala, does this also, resonate with your colleagues in Zimbabwe, fake news? Because how can, fake news be curbed by the press itself and, of course, keep press freedom encouraged?
Well, the issue of fake news and misinformation is a very delicate and very a personal one to journalists, because for any professionally trained journalist, they know there's something called ethics, and we know what we have to do and what we shouldn't do. We know how to gather our news. We know how to verify our news. We know you need a source. You need to balance your article or your news piece, your beat, before you release it to the public. But now, because of social media, remember, we are not just in competition with each other as media houses to see who breaks the news first. We are actually competing with what we call citizen journalists. We are competing with people that have got nothing to do, and they've got plenty Wi-Fi or data bundles on their hands that can just sit there and come up with whatever stories or twists and send misinformation and disinformation out there and fake news. This is quite a very sensitive topic. I personally think as journalists, we need to up our game, because the competition of people that we are running this race with are many. There are plenty. And some of them don't have the ethics that we were taught when we took up this profession. Some of them, they are just doing it for the love of likes and retweets. Some are doing it for the love of likes and reactions on Facebook and shares, that, oh, my post got 300 shares. Some are doing it for that, but we are doing it for the public good, like this year's theme. We are doing it for the public good, for development, for education, for entertainment, for a whole lot of other things, the 5 pillars of journalism. But someone out there is not even aware of that. So I think we need to up our game as journalists. I would hate to hear a journalist that says they do not have a smartphone, or they do not have access to internet, which can be true. I mean, we have rural journalists who may not have access to those gadgets, but we need to stay ahead. We need to be a step ahead, so that even when the fake news comes in, someone will say, but no, I saw something somewhere, it was written differently, let me go and verify. I think the way we report, the way we tell our stories, we should encourage our audiences to get to a level where they say, I need to verify this first. I need to go to News Central. If News Central didn't post this, didn't publish this, then there's something fishy, yeah.
Frederick, there's also something in Nigeria that resonates with the social media. Once it's getting close to the election, a lot of online platforms, surface, especially those being managed by media aides of politicians. Now, how can journalists and media houses continue to stay afloat amid the global challenges of, what fake news and the internet has brought upon the people, especially even now in the world of the pandemic?
Yeah, when it comes to finance and the media, particularly online platforms, genuine online platforms, it's quite a problem. It's because you have to depend on adverts, you have to also depend on brand. But what most online platforms do now is to go into partnership with reputable international NGOs, Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, for brands to sustain their business. That's what they do. But I want to say something very critical. The theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day is information as for public good. Now, the problem is not just fake news by the government. You have a situation where, of course, citizens in any way in the country would go and manufacture stories. 30 killed in Zamfara, or 30, Igbo or Yoruba killed in Zamfara, of course, just to stoke ethnic tension. We have instances like this, and blogs pick this up without verifying, without going through the normal process of verifying the news, put it up there. So we have a problem. For us, we can't just fold our arms and watch things go this way. There should be sanctions, and these sanctions should be by the real practitioners, the genuine practitioners. We can actually wait and let social media, and fake news destroy the country. No, we have to sanitize the system, and it's the responsibility of practitioners. It is our duty to sanitize the system. There should be sanctions. The problem why there is a preponderance, there's a much more rooming of this problem is because there is no sanction. Nobody has been. Of course, we have the cybercrime law, but when it affects a particular blog, they all cry persecution. You're persecuting a journalist. No, we can't actually continue this way. There should be sanctions for those who deliberately promote hate speeches, who promote things that actually could set off an ethnic inferno in the country. There should be sanctions. We can't continue. We can't just continue this way. There should be sanctions, and practitioners, journalists should come together to do this. Not the government. It shouldn't be the government, because if we leave it to the government, it is susceptible to influence. It is susceptible to the miscarriage. So it is our responsibility. We have to sit up. We can't continue like this. By 2023, Nigeria will be going to the polls again, and of course, fake news will definitely abound. So what are we doing about this? What are we doing?
Well, it's a big question there, but it's a fine place for us to say many thanks for being such a nice company, Frederick Nwabufo and Lala Ngwanya from Zimbabwe. When we come back after the break, we'll be taking a trip to Liberia and Sierra Leone, where two other journalists will be joining us to look at this day, World Press Freedom Day. We're still celebrating journalists and journalism today, but now I'm being joined by Abdul Malik Bangura, journalist from Sierra Leone. Welcome to Village Square Africa, Abdul Malik.
Welcome, my brother. Good evening. Good evening, Nigeria. Good evening, Sierra Leone. Good evening, West Africa.
Well, it's really good to see you with that smile. But quickly here, how's it been, in Sierra Leone? How has the marking of this auspicious moment for journalists been for you all there?
Well, here in Sierra Leone is quite a bit an ironic day. Let me say it's a bittersweet celebration, owing to the fact that we have, this is the first celebration of, let me say, the World Press World Press Freedom Day since the let me say the repeal of the draconian criminal and seditious libel law in Sierra Leone, which was done last year in August 2020. But nonetheless, there is also another issue of lashing the government, apparently because of there is a bill which has been tabled in Parliament that has to do with cybercrime, which the debate is now taking its toll into another level in Sierra Leone. Many media practitioners are condemning that bill, saying that it impedes on the rights to freedom of expression, which they say actually it's, let me say, a replacement. Some of them are saying that the current cybercrime bill is a replacement of the already repealed criminal libel law. So instead of journalists in Sierra Leone praising the government this year for repealing the criminal libel law, which we see journalists over the years have been striving so hard for its repeal, but nonetheless, some are still lashing the government. Even the president of the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists today in his statement lashed at the government, saying that the government must not enact the cybercrime bill, which they said infringe on the rights to freedom of expression of not only journalists, but also Sierra Leoneans.
Well, we haven't actually had opportunity of looking at, the fine details of that bill, but it would seem as if it's almost the same, outcry in Nigeria when the MPs, the National Assembly, that's what it's called in Nigeria, were trying to get a social media bill as well as, a bill on fake news. But, Abdul Malik, there is a perceived hostility and mistrust of the press by state actors and other forces. Just by listening to you, I can get a sense of that. How can journalists protect themselves from getting harmed?
Well, one of the problems, to be very honest with you, my brother, most of the people who are being arrested of late for issue of cybercrime are not journalists. It is just that Sierra Leone Association of Journalists are saying that they have, let me say, an obligation to protect free speech in Sierra Leone, because that's one of the major issues they are saying. Because if you look at some of the arrests of cybercrime, cyberbullying of late in Sierra Leone, they are politicians. Most of the people who are being arrested are politicians. They are actually not journalists like myself and you. So you find out that the politicians are the ones who are being arrested, and the politicians are the ones who are going to enact these laws. So you find out that they are actually fighting to protect themselves, but SLAJ is being like a collateral damage in the entire thing. So I believe even though it has not been accepted, even though we are having issues of it being accepted, but you see the majority of the people being involved, the stakeholders at all levels are looking at the possibility of themselves protecting themselves, which are the politicians. And interestingly, in Sierra Leone, we have a parliamentary structure where the majority party is leading the minority by just a single seat. We have the majority having 58 seats and the minority party having 57 seats. And we have a lot of opposition parties, again, that are now siding with the main opposition. So interestingly, it is like now the opposition are having the backing, a backing of the majority in the House as against the ruling party. But it has not been submitted yet to a vote. It was submitted in Parliament. The Minister of Information was advised to go and do a lot of consultations again, which are taking place now, because you can see the minister himself being very active on social media, trying to persuade various stakeholders on the relevance and why he thinks this particular bill should be passed into law.
Well, just hold your thought there, Bangura. I'll come back to you there in Sierra Leone. Let me quickly go to Liberia, where Anthony Stevens is. Anthony, good to see you, and well, happy World Freedom Day. How has it been in Monrovia at the moment?
Well, it's fine generally. Apologies for the poor quality of my voice. I'm battling with cold. The official celebration is taking place in Grand Coup County, Barclayville, Grand Coup County. Grand Coup is one of the 15 political subdivisions of Liberia. So it's part of the traditional rotational policy of the President of Liberia to rotate the celebrations of World Press Freedom Day, and this year's celebrations are taking place in Grand Coup County.
Well, that's good to know, making almost every part of the country experience what it is like to celebrate journalists. But quickly here, Anthony, you know, some countries on the continent have the issue of, you know, how members of staff are being treated. You know, does this also resonate with journalists in Liberia, saying how good it is to work as a journalist in Liberia? I think that should be the question.
Well, first, one has to know that this is a calling, it's a profession that you have to choose to take on as a career. You shouldn't enter journalism with the perception or with the mindset that you're going to make money, you're going to get rich. Yes, of course, you'll be able to feed yourself and your family, but importantly, you are serving humanity. Yes, there are issues of low pay of journalists, and that's not unique to Liberia. You find that in many other West African countries. But journalists in Liberia have tried to maintain ethical standards.
Let me come back to Abdul Malik Bangura in Sierra Leone. Quickly here, you had our friend and colleague Anthony in Liberia speak on how it's been celebrated or it's been marked in Liberia at the moment. But again, we also went into welfare of journalists because this is very important, as this also helps in keeping them safe and doing their jobs creditably and professionally well. So how does it work in Sierra Leone?
Discussion in our guild platform. Actually, today we haven't heard from the president, one of which quotes, and I quote from it now. It says, in its current draft it's not good law for our country. And he was actually more or less focusing on the cybercrime bill. Well, let me look at the issue of the question raised. Yeah, I think there is a very big difference between free speech, freedom of speech, and what we refer to as press freedom. In Sierra Leone, there is an effort to ensure that we have free speech or freedom of expression. But press freedom goes beyond freedom of expression. That was what I was actually explaining to some colleagues today. Freedom of expression, you can have the right to freedom of expression, but you don't have the right to press freedom. Press freedom, we look at most of the time the external factors that affect journalists, their work and all. But there are times we also need to look at some of the internal factors in the newsroom. Which policies we are bringing up in ensuring that we found myself in very difficult situations when my reporters will submit certain articles that do not resonate with the editorial policies of my newspaper. And you know, definitely some of these editorial policies we have may be influenced by economic issues, by social issues, by political issues, by religious issues. You know, a journalist might go round and round, do a very masterpiece investigations on very good issues that have to do with human interest, submit it to the editor, and the editor will not put it out. That itself is not his perspective. That itself impedes on that particular journalist's press freedom. We look at the external factors, what government laws are, what are the laws, what are the policies, what are some of the things that have been passed, how is government making efforts to ensure that we have our rights to freedom of expression. But how are we going to look at these internal factors is where the issue is. We don't have regulatory framework that compel editors to publish articles that are brought in by reporters. You may have a reporter that will have investigated a very good article, a very good story. The reporter will have done is a very good work and submit it to you as the editor. You will step on that article, you will step on that particular report. You will not publish it because it does not resonate with your political or maybe say regional or individual editorial interest. We need to also try to see how we are going to reform our journalism, because looking at press freedom does not only, like I said, amount to what we call a freedom of expression. Even though you have your rights to freedom of expression, but you cannot get to wider audience without the press. You can have your rights to freedom of expression, but that can only be, how do we make access to the press? We have newspaper houses, we have press houses that are being used as political tool. They are being used to circulate hate. They are being used on fear in biased political reportings. They are being used as political, let me say, conduit pipe. You know,
let me bring in, a moment here, Abdul Malik. Let me quickly bring in Anthony here in Liberia. Anthony, quickly, the thing here, specifically, I think also this resonates with your country, Liberia, as well as Abdul Malik's country, Sierra Leone, where I think the continent is excited by, the return of democracy to these two countries. How can the press, help reshape, Africa's democracy going forward?
Well, the press or the media is indispensable in terms of that. I thought to make one key point when I was listening to
Abdul Malik.
Malik speaking.
Okay, by all means, go ahead.
He did talk about independence in a broader context, not from the perspective of just the fact that journalists are not physically harassed, but media personnel could be psychologically harassed. That does not only go to their bosses, it could also go to external forces, say people working in government. Say, for instance, if a media house heavily relies on the government for advertisements, and that media house is very critical of the performance of the government could withhold such ads and don't want to deal with such a media house. That could to some extent affect the independence of that media house, and it could compel that media house to practice self-censorship. And you find that in Liberia too, there's this concern about self-censorship. The government here is the biggest advertiser, and many of the media houses do not want to fall in trouble with the government, so sometimes they do practice self-censorship. That is a fact that is not in dispute. The media is not 100% free. Yes, journalists may not be physically harassed every time, but they could be harassed psychologically. They could be harassed in terms of revenue, that they can't get advertisements from the biggest advertiser. They won't be able to pay their employees. These media houses won't be able to pay their employees, and that, of course, is something that does affect their professionalism, their independence. The other side of it, about the question you asked about how the media generally in Africa can help to shift the focus of the continent, is very key. But it comes with some innovation. I think the media houses in Africa should begin to think outside the box now, should think about innovation, thinking about blending themselves, forging partnerships with like-minded institutions. There are people in the global community that are willing to help media development. You got to think about how do you have to sustain yourself as a media institution so that you do not coward yourself into self-censorship so that it does not affect your independence and your professional output. How do you forge partnerships? That's very key in shaping the focus of the African continent. And that's not unique to the media in Liberia. It's something that all media houses should begin to think about, because if you hear the stories of other media houses, of other journalists in other parts of Africa, they tell you a similar story. They tell you the similar thing, that they are having difficulties with sustainability. How do they sustain themselves? It's about time that like-minded media houses forge partnerships, merge together to form a stronger team, or is it about time that they look outside the box to ask media development institutions in developed countries to help them to be able to train their personnel and be able to maintain key personnel on staff so they can be able to fully operate? These are some of the things now we should be thinking about discussing, because if we just rely heavily on revenues, I mean, it's not going to help any longer, because we have COVID-19. Long before COVID-19, there were signs that many of the economies in Africa were going into recession. Now COVID-19 has just compounded that. And some of the bigger economies that were very resourceful, that were very helpful to media houses, are themselves having challenges of their own. So before they can address issues of media development in Africa, they have to address their own economic rebranding. And that's very key for the survival of the media. So I think innovation going forward is very key for the survivability of Africa's media.
Well, I think you've said so much there that the continent can hold on to. How in a subtle way the government can actually starve some media organization of funds to the extent that it can, in a subtle way, get it out of business. Quickly here, I want you to react to that, Abdul Malik, so that we can close.
Actually, like the question you ask on the role of the media in democracy, because generally they will say the freedom of expression is sine qua non to democratic good governance. Without freedom of expression, there is no democratic good governance. For there to be good democratic good governance, there must be freedom of expression. We know our fundamental human rights are interrelated. The right to freedom of expression is what is used to protect your right to life, your right to freedom of conscience, your right to freedom of movement, your rights, all other rights that are enshrined in our local and international human rights instruments. But now back to what my brother was saying with regards to the evolution of human rights, the evolution of the media in trying to propel development and democratic credentials in Africa. Well, I believe already there is a set standard. There's a set standard, if we could recall, from the Rwandan genocide. There was a Carleton University conference held about reshaping the media in democracies and all. I believe what the media should do now is to adopt the model of human rights journalism. Because if we are talking about press freedom, we must also now focus on human rights journalism, how we are to protect ourselves. My brother Stephen in my neighboring country was mentioning a lot of issues that are very pertinent. One of the major issues that we have had in Sierra Leone is media houses not protecting their journalists. We have seen cases of journalists being beaten, but their media houses are not coming out to protect those journalists. But at the end, it is the Association of Journalists that is coming out to protect. There was a case of 2 journalists being beaten at a sports event by, they were state broadcaster journalists. But in Sierra Leone, the managing director of the state broadcaster is being appointed by the president. So you find out that, one, the person cannot come out to condemn the government because of his job, and 2, majority, let me say, 90 or 80%.
I think that actually resonates with some other. Sorry to butt in there because we're actually out of time. That actually resonates with some other countries. It has happened in Nigeria, but I think things are changing. For instance, in Nigeria, whereby some employers have started, taking legal actions against people who go physical on their members of staff. But as you rightly said, it's a thing that must be looked into. And again, the issue of funding is quite key there, as raised by Anthony. And we hope that, we'll get this conversation going in the days ahead. Many thanks for being such nice company. Abdul Malik Bagura and, of course, Anthony Stevens. It's a delight speaking with both of you. And, of course, Anthony, you go take care of yourself. Thank you for your time. But again, the growth of the media runs along the same course with the growth of any society, and this is needed in Africa. The press must be free for the world to be a better place, and is evident in the growth enjoyed by nations who adopt such methods. Thank you very much, everyone. And of course, I'll be here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.